Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a hatless VOXOLOGY podcast.
Hello.
Oh, what? What?
What? No. Okay. What's up, everybody? We'll get to VOXOLOGY podcast.
What's up, everybody?
Just today, Steffi here.
Steffi here.
You got Mike, Tim Stafford.
Tim Stafford, yep.
Great sound about us.
Shout out. Who we shouting out?
Is Andy Bear.
Andy Bear.
Brenda,
yep.
And Bonnie Lewis.
And Bonnie Lewis, yes.
The Vox podcast people.
And the Vox podcast people. Well done,
That was
Seth.
like the whole history of Vox in 30 seconds.
Seriously, yes. Seth Erie has a big day. So he's been sick all week. So we've been watching every variation of Monsters, Inc., Pixie Dust, Tinkerbell movies. And what else? Newsies. What else have we watched? Boss Baby. Yeah, all the ones. But Seth today, hold on, you gotta listen to this.
What?
Oh, you're gonna show everyone? Okay. So for the 12 of you that watch on YouTube, Seth Erie he went to his new high school today.
Yeah.
So Seth is 8th grade. We're gonna throw a graduation party, a rager. And so he's going to start his freshman year in high school. So he's moving on up to Franklin High School today. Show him, Seth. Show him that piece of paper you got.
Okay, I go to Franklin High School.
Franklin High School.
We have bathrooms.
Yep.
We have music.
They have bathrooms.
We have science class.
Science class. Music.
Studies, music.
Social studies, music.
Dance party.
And dance party?
Yeah.
In high school?
Sounds amazing.
Man. Did you ever see when Zac Efron was hosting?
Peace out.
Peace out. Zac Efron was hosting Saturday Night Live right after he did all the High School Musical movies.
Die.
Wow.
Subscribe or die. And he was coming back as like a college student who graduated from that fictional high school and High School Musical.
No.
And he's talking to the graduates. He's come back and like is a speaker at the commencement. He's like, you guys, nobody sings at lunch. Like he just all the dumb stuff. It was great. It was great. So hello, Timothy. As I before I was joyfully interrupted by Seth Erie. I wanted to welcome everyone to a hatless version of the podcast because for the 11 of you that listen, Tim Stafford doesn't have a hat on. And so like he has just a great freaking head of hair.
Well, I just cut about a foot of it off.
Yeah. You don't have to brag, bro. You don't have to brag. Who's that Edward? You look like Edward.
Scissorhands.
No, the actor. Branagh.
Eric
B-A-R. Nope. You look
Kenneth
like
Branagh.
Yes. Is that who it is?
Not the Shakespeare guy. I don't know.
But you look like him. Whoever you know. Welcome to the show, everybody. We're delighted you're with us. For some reason, you all are in a particularly encouraging mood, and so thank you for all the kind emails. Yeah. Some days you're not. And so we'll take it when we can get it. Some days you're just like, you guys are idiots.
You ruined my faith.
Yeah, we've received it all. But so just thank you for those of you that take the time. Thank you for our incredibly generous Patreon and Tithely communities that support this. Tim Stafford is flying out. Next week's podcast, we're going to record live together in Nashville, Tennessee with Susie Lind, Tim Gombis, Tim Stafford, Mike Erie. And so that's going to be great. So part of what you give to is stuff like that. And so anyway, we're super excited. And Tim has prepared his bodily temple by shaving off evidently a foot of hair. And it's fantastic. So speaking of hair today, first of all, how are you?
Great.
We haven't checked in a couple of days. Are you good?
Yeah, I'm wrapping up my semester today. I turned my grades today.
Let me ask you this question. All right, this is a totally lame dad pastor question, but give me 2 things that are going great in your life and 1 thing that you're concerned about. And I realize that ratio per your personality type could easily be reversed. That's why
easily.
That's why I'm choosing 2 on the positive side.
Yep.
Start
Well,
with the negative. That one's easier.
the negative. Well, right before this, I was watching professors being middle-aged female professors being manhandled by the police at some
Excellent.
of those protests on the college. They were just walking to class.
Awesome.
Long thread there.
Yep.
But I am happy to be ending. This was a tough semester, so I'm glad to be wrapping that up.
Yeah.
So that's a positive.
That's one. Yep.
And last night I went and watched. What is that? Do you see that?
I don't know. Yeah. Sometimes it'll automatic bubble.
That's so weird. The other day it did balloons,
Yeah.
and I don't know why or how.
Yeah.
Or
I don't know either.
I got to watch Mazzy perform in a musical last night. That was fun.
Hey, what'd she play?
She was playing Merida. It was like a bunch of fairy tale things kind of all tied together. And so we watched Brave before we went to the play so she could pump herself up.
I'll be shooting from my own hand.
So it was a pretty good movie.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
How about you?
Yelling from
What do
the
you
other
got?
room.
Give me 2 negatives and 1 positive.
2 negatives. Oh, I love that. That's much harder. Positive, Big Nate, my 20-year-old son is home for 2 weeks. We played pickleball this morning and did quite well. Negative has been Seth Erie with fevers for 5 or 6 days straight. Just a virus. And so what you get is you get hyper Seth. Yeah, exactly. Yep. But then he'll bottom out with some sort of fever, and no one's home right now. So it's just Seth and Dad. So I'm defenseless against this.
Yeah.
That's weird.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And so that was a downer for sure.
Yeah.
Things, I mean, I am boy, what's another thing I'm really down about? I don't know. I'm down about anything that has you down.
Oh, thank you.
I'm down about the state of American
Everything.
Civil discourse. I'm down about reading yet more horrible church stories. Just every single week, multiple. I mean, I'm just blown away. I'm blown away. How in the world could we as a church people think we're doing a great job? I mean, this is the fruit. The fruit is chaos. So I don't know. I've got a sermon. That's
Can we
not
talk
finished.
about that for a second? I was actually thinking about that this morning, about how like this is a moment in time. I'm sure you can say this about almost any moment in time, but it really feels like this is such an important moment for us to like really double down on like what it means to be a follower of Jesus and what we're invited into, because it does seem like there's all those things that are in our algorithms for negative church stuff, but there's also just Christians in public saying some really gnarly things. And then there's a lot of people who are hurting really bad and are confused at the state of affairs and confused as why things are the way they are. And it'd be such a great time to actually love your neighbor and love your enemy. And like really, really, I had that stupid old song stuck in my head this morning. They'll know we're Christians by our love. But it's like, that's not what we're known for or by. And what a time period it would be to really just serve.
Yeah. And for me, for me, all I can do is concentrate on my loving and being a part of a community that's loving and, all the things that we're always talking about, because But I mean, I would have to reach. I mean, I took my truck in for an oil change and came away with a $2,300 bill. I didn't like that at all.
No.
So, I mean, but I got to stretch. Like, it's my wife's birthday today. Sethy's home. Nate's home. My girl, my sweet Hannah, is coming home next Wednesday. And for those of you that are parents of older kids or empty nesters, man, when the kids come home and it's just for a brief time, it's just great. It's just super fun. So, and then there's the one that always stays here and keeps pacing around and smiling into the camera. Sethy, do you need attention right now? Have you been neglected all week?
Yes, I am.
You've not been.
So first of all, no. Secondly, yes.
First of all, no. And secondly, yes. Dude, he's you know what? He's training for politics right there.
Oh man, is that a new? Is that from something?
He's pulled it. Well, we say that all the time. We'll just say, he'll ask something. And we're like, first of all, no, and second of all, no. And so he got a hold of that.
Oh, that was rich.
I know, dude. So yeah. So I'm like you, man. I grieve this, and I grieve, that I'm complicit, and I can't listen to all of this. Like we're doing a series of conversations in the church I'm a part of on bad religion, and so like great band. I told them this. I want to do a series called Social Distortion.
I love it.
Offspring, Black Flag, whatever else. Misfits.
I love it.
The punk names are just great sermon series names. That's just how it is. But we've been talking about Jesus has all of these woes against the Pharisees, in Matthew 23. And man, it's so easy to talk about all of the bad actors out there. And it's just so hard to go, nope, the plank is in my eye. How have I been complicit in bad religion? And so it's been this great dance, because we're trying to, and what Jesus does, of course, is, he literally identifies they're yoking people to destruction by following some of the Pharisees' teaching. And, he says you make them children of hell twice as much as you are, when you can make converts. And it's in this great prophetic tradition. But if you just take time to unpack what he's saying, good Lord, it's been the temptation of religious folks, all the way around. All that is to say, the two ways I can somehow stay balanced mentally in the midst of all of the bad news is focusing on my own stuff, my own complicity, and then just being local. So, I just went out. We have a neighbor who's an indigenous American, a first American, a Native American. I'm not sure what the best term is. He's incredible. He runs several ministries on reservations throughout America and Canada. He's got, I think there are like 9 kids that live with him, several of whom are not his, but it's just a safe place. And then I got a guy across the street, Philip. His wife just had an internal bleed. Charles just had a knee surgery, knee replacement surgery, and we're just all out there talking and being good neighbors to one another, like paying attention to each other. And that just, there's something about that, man. It grounds me. It helps. So as much as, and we had a dear listener who was visiting Nashville, showed up at the church on Sunday, which that happens every now and again. And it's just the greatest thing to meet people who actually listen to this thing.
It's always a trip.
And it is always a trip.
I told you about the guy in Oregon, right? That walked up and, sorry that I don't remember your name, but for an audio platform, we were at some random little hostel cafe, and he walked up and he's like, "Are you on a podcast?" And I was like, "What?"
You recognize your voice, I
guess. And I was just sitting at a table talking to Shauna. Like, it wasn't like I wasn't speaking publicly or something.
Bro, you have a great voice.
Random. But yes, I think that and we talked about this last episode or 2 episodes ago with Gombis about like the focusing on, balancing the mental health with justice issues and stuff, and what you can affect and what you can't affect, and what it means to look like. And it's like, if we just trying to encourage everybody to do exactly that, like what happens if every Christian in the United States focuses on their street and just serving to the fullest extent? I know it sounds dumb, but it's like, there's just so much despair, and maybe it is because of social media and we see it all and blah, 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 but it doesn't change the fact that it's there.
Yeah.
So it's like, how can we love, and how can we just really do that?
Well, to answer that question, we're going to spend some more time on the word rule. Great tie-in, dude. The segues are amazing. And it's funny.
First of all, no.
Yep. And secondly, yes. Um, so I know we have listeners who do not like our little banter, and there are listeners who just want to dive in, to content. And that's, you know what, we're here to serve all people. Often Tim and I have not caught up, and so we're just slamming in, and it's like, oh, here's my friend, and I want to talk to him. And I forget that we're actually recording stuff for the internet that will be around forever. But we're going to take a little segue off of the word rule. And this is, and the reason we're doing it is because one of the great things, one of the great tragedies of the American church in the last 50 years is the assumption that Christians, if more Christians were in power, we would be better off.
Yeah.
That somehow the worldly power over, coercive power, is safe with Christians, and neither power nor Christians are affected. If we just had good character people in highly accountable systems, we'd be fine. And I think that is a really subtle and deceptive trap. And an author who's really explored this recently is David Fitch. It's called Reckoning with Power. And his argument, which we're going to rehearse a bit today, is essentially there isn't, the assumption of many Christians is there's just power, and it can be used for good or used for evil.
Right.
And so the key is finding people who will use it for good, or building systems where it will be used for good. And so one of the things that Fitch really goes after is no, Christians are not to use worldly power except in the rarest of circumstances. And those circumstances are outlined in Romans 13 about the government having the use of the sword, quote unquote, to preserve life. And so I found this to be really helpful, because I've often bought that standard story too, that that as image bearers, we have power in the world. We have power to make things happen. I make decisions all the time over a tiny sphere of my car and my house and my body and the things that I can affect in the world through my direct action. That's power. And power can also be disguised as privilege. Power can also be disguised as like social systems. I mean, so we're embedded and embodied, and we're just surrounded by power. And I always thought, yes, the issue isn't can somebody use power. The issue is who's going to use it, and are there trustworthy people with it? And so many of our great moral stories are about the right use of power, right? All of our superhero movies are about the redemptive use of power, or the redemptive use of violence. And what makes Lord of the Rings so interesting is Lord of the Rings has a very Christian view of power, namely that power always corrupts, always. And that the only thing you can do with it is destroy it and operate using a different power altogether. And that's why Lord of the Rings is such a highly regarded picture of the kingdom. It's not because there are trolls and elves and magic spells and all the things, and the fact that Legolas, according to my wife, is very handsome, and so on. But it's an accounting of power that says even the greatest among them who already have power, like Gandalf, or who's the white,
Galadriel,
the white,
or...
yeah, Kate, whatever,
Blanchett.
They all have a temptation moment, but none of them think they can use it for good.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. That's the trap. Everyone else thinks. And so what Fitch does is he makes that argument theologically.
They both have such big, angry responses to the temptation of the ring.
It's because it's genuinely tempting.
Yeah.
I mean, Gandalf in the first movie says, imagine the good I could do with this thing. And each of them has a temptation moment. Every character that comes in contact with it has a temptation moment with it. And, and so there's, it's worth exploring, because what we're seeing in terms of the political imagination of a lot of American Christians is that there's only one way to advance the kingdom of God, and that's through coercive legislative power over. And so we need people to protect our Christian values. We need people to stop the encroaching of secularism or sexual morality or whatever it is that's encroaching. We just have to. And this reflects really bad theology. And it reflects a profound lack of trust that the way of Jesus works in the world.
Yeah.
And so it's worth, to me, this is getting to the nitty-gritty of why it is that a lot of us have been taken in by the promises of the Republican Party that Christians will be empowered again. Why so many of us have exchanged the humble and meek way of Jesus for kind of the bombastic way of social media posts and pronouncements and public demonstrations of whatever. And so this is like this to me is a really big deal. And a lot of the theological arguments for this understanding of power come from Genesis 1, where we're called to rule. And they'll say that the word rule there is a word that means that government was given prior to the fall, and that means government can be redeemed. And what we're going to say is, no, rule there means ruling in the way that God ruled, which was, as we argued, right, more of a power with than a power over. And not only that, hierarchy isn't introduced until Genesis 3, which is the fall, which means power over is to be resisted in its very nature. So this is a big argument, because a lot of the more sophisticated thinking around Christian nationalism or Christian involvement in politics assumes there's just one kind of power, or it will assume, as we'll see, that there are two kinds of power, but the power of Jesus only affects individual souls. It's only salvific.
Right.
But the power, to get things done and to achieve justice and whatever else, that's kind of the power over what we're calling worldly power. Makes sense so far?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to channel a bunch of Fitch and Boyd and Scott McKnight and others who have Andy Crouch, who've written on these sorts of things. But the Fitch book was a very, very different accounting of, because his argument is all these other folks are assuming there's one power that can be used well. And Fitch's argument, which is a very Anabaptist traditional argument, is that no, worldly power should never be used at all among God's people. Not only among them, but even in. Now Fitch is going to nuance this and say, no, there's a place for worldly power. Of course, it's like a traffic light. Like a traffic light doesn't have coercive power, but it's backed by coercive power, right? When you're at a traffic light, we all agree that we're going to obey the colors. And if we don't obey the colors, there was a coercive aspect to our obedience or disobedience that comes in the form of traffic tickets or fines or, being arrested for egregious issues or whatever. And so there is a place in a fallen world for things that preserve. But that's the best worldly power can do. It can't redeem, it can't heal, it can't transform. And those are the aims of the work of God in the world. And so it's when Christians think that somehow we can heal, redeem, and restore using coercive power over,
right, that's
where we get into real trouble. And so the abortion debate is a great example of how this tangibly plays out. The difference between saying, no, the goal of God in the world is to outlaw abortion, or is the goal of God in the world to create an alternative so that abortion no longer is attractive to begin with.
Right.
And so that's where the divide happens, right? Because the argument for overruling Roe v. Wade and then instituting these kind of statewide bans is, listen, we're preserving life. And the argument that we had, and we would make along with many others, is hallelujah, I'm all for preserving life wherever possible. I mean, I am pro-life to the max. But which is more pro-life? Having states that enforce abortion bans, or being so committed to women, to young women, to single mothers, to socially vulnerable and economically vulnerable people, and providing such great safety nets of care and support that abortion just on its own is chosen less and less.
Yeah.
So which power should be at work there? So this is kind of what we're setting up. And just as a reminder, and so I know I'm overselling this, but we're going to take like 2 or 3 episodes on it. And it's really, really important. It's been super helpful for me to think through how you run a church so that there's no expression of power over.
I don't think you need to worry about this being redundant. Just because, I mean, we all have only lived in,
right,
for the most part, the power over model. So don't feel
Yes.
like.
Well, one of the things I love about what we do is I love that we'll start on a series. We don't plan. We don't have a master plan. Like there's no, to Tim's hatred of me, there's no master calendar. And so it'll just be like, so, okay, yeah, we're talking about to be human out of Genesis. And then we get to stuff and then it'll be like, oh, this seems worthy of a little more attention. And to me,
I love it.
this seems worthy of a lot more attention. All right. So 2 kinds of power, according to Fitch. Power over. This is worldly power, which is exerted over persons. It's coercive. It is controlling. It's enforced, and obviously very, very prone to abuse. Max Weber, a 19th century sociologist, described power as the probability that one actor within a social relationship will be in a position to carry out his own will despite resistance. Right? So people don't want to do the things I want them to do. Power is when I can make them do the things.
Yeah.
Yep. Now, that power could be direct force, but I could also have the power to make them want to do it.
Mm-hmm.
A political theorist, named Robert Dahl says power is A has the power over B to the extent that he can get B to do something that B would not otherwise do. So that's the standard account of power over.
Mm-hmm.
And power over, can, as we said last episode, can be manifested a bunch of different ways. It's not just brute force, although that's the extreme version of this is violence,
Mm-hmm.
right? I can beat you into submission. But power over can also be held in terms of expertise. When I take my car to get an oil change and they say, dude, your tires need replaced and your rear brakes. And I'm like, I mean, the tires did need replaced, but I'm not looking at my brake pads to see how many millimeters they are left. I'm submitting myself and would not choose otherwise to spend $2,300 on my truck. But I do so because, right, there's a power to expertise. It's when a physician or a psychiatrist give you instructions and you say yes. But power over is also found in social systems. There are social sanctions against people that say certain words. Or an employer has power over us when they can fire us or choose not to pay us or whatever. So power over isn't just violent power, but it's power that, like I said, can be found in privilege too. When I walk in to a social setting in a church environment as a white, 30-something male, that's different than when Susie, our friend Susie, walks in a church leadership situation as a female. It just is.
It's such an important distinction too, because it seems easy to avoid a violent power over. Oh yeah, I'm not going to go exert myself physically over somebody. But that one, entitlement,
it's
or
the
privilege
power
you don't even know you are using or
That's
participating in. Yeah,
exactly. So when we lived in Columbus, I've talked about this before. We lived in a suburb, and I didn't know this when we moved there. We wouldn't have moved there. We lived in a suburb where until the 1950s, there was a housing code that said that the city would buy the property if it was going to be sold to someone. I think it was Jewish and it was African American.
Yeah.
I know it was for sure African American. I'm not sure it was Jewish, although I've heard of similar codes against Jewish folks. And that's within the lifetime of people who are roaming around having power these days. I mean, so I would never have known. But Upper Arlington is just very, very white and very wealthy. And you're like,
Yeah.
oh, well, there it is.
Yeah.
That's a form of power over.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Redistricting. Another form. I mean, it's like, that's such a big point to say, is that power over is embedded in social systems. And it takes many, many forms. And that's why when it comes to church, the most natural way we organize church is power over.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the senior pastor. Here's the board. Here's the organizational chart. Here are the keys to, the facilities, to the money, to the whatever influence. And it's one of the reasons why we're getting the fruit of the American church that we're getting. But we'll get to that later. So power with or power under. All right. This is power that works relationally with and among persons. So with and among God, with and among other people. God's power is never coercive.
Oh, sorry. I didn't get back to you.
You got to get your apple juice. Of course, man. Of course, son. Well done. God works by the Spirit, and the Spirit persuades. He never overrides. I mean, Jesus never rode anyone's agency. He would bring conviction, but when the rich young ruler shows up and is like, yeah, I'm in. And Jesus is like, are you? Why don't you go sell everything? And he's like, nah. And Jesus loves him and lets him go.
Yeah.
Power with always is relational power. It works in cooperation with other agents. And this is such a big deal. God's power reorders established power over relationships. Whenever Paul is speaking into power over situations, whether it's in the church or in the household, he is always reordering power. Mm-hmm. Always. So that power over is no longer the main power at work, but rather mutuality and reciprocity. And that we are all equally under the power of God. I mean, it's ridiculous. And so when the church codifies power over in the church and in the household, right, we're playing right into the powers and principalities who love nothing more than Christians who think they can use power for good.
Yeah.
Or power over for good. So this power has to be chosen against. Worldly power has to be chosen against, and this other power has to be deliberately chosen. This is the power of being with people. This is the power of mutuality and plurality and cooperation. This power sees violence and manipulation as destructive in all situations. Now, that doesn't mean it's not necessary. There are times when you're in a situation, and to preserve life, you engage in violence. I understand that. But that's not something ever Christians look at and go, yeah, that was Christian. No, that was human, but that wasn't Christian. You know what I mean? Like, so I know Christians who work as law enforcement or in the military. And there is, and they deeply wrestle with what we're exploring here, So we'll get to that. We'll get to nonviolence and things, down the road a little bit. But the big trap that Fitch argues is that we believe that power doesn't really get things done in the world, and that we need to use the power over to really get things done.
The power with doesn't get things done.
The power with does not get things done. And the counterexamples, that he points are like Martin Luther King Jr., who saw love as a legitimate power in the world, and that conflicts were never meant to humiliate opponents, but to enter into friendships. And that there's a true force, a true power that works. It's like the guy we've talked about before, who is an African-American man, has entered into a relationship with hundreds of former and current Ku Klux Klan members. There's a power there that's unleashed. There's a power there when people forgive and confess sin. There's something is real that happens in the world that isn't just about human souls and saving our insides. There's a real power at work in the world that's just so different. And so the power of nonviolence, right, in the movements of Gandhi, Martin Luther King, and other places.
It's like the most anti-Quentin Tarantino movie is that guy befriending a couple hundred KKK members. And
Mm-hmm. Right. And this is the power that Jesus exerted, as we'll see.
mm-hmm.
So the problem, though, is that power with can also be, in the hands of some, an expression of power over. You know, I used to be in meetings, and we thought we would be having a meeting actually deciding something, but you'd realize the decision had already been made. And the input we were all giving was just to get our buy-in in the decision that had already been made. So it promised power with, but it wasn't. It was still power over.
You know, we had this conversation when we were working in the prison about the difference between being a voice for the voiceless and helping to give a voice to the voiceless so that they could have their voice. And you would find often that what you thought you were doing really intentional work by being a voice for the voiceless,
but you still had power over.
Yeah.
And
your intentions may be really good, but
yes. And Fitch does a great job with that, because there's one book in particular that calls for the use of leverage or privilege to help so for those in privileged spaces to make room, to use their privilege to make room for those that don't have the same privilege. And Fitch gets into how easily that can become a power over situation too. Because the privileged one is still determining who they give the power to.
Right.
You know what I mean? He just drills down into these insidious traps of, oh yeah, my job isn't to advocate for the powerless, but to empower the powerless. And that's a different thing. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying advocating's bad or wrong. No, not at all. Not at all. Yes, sir. You went poop. Okay. Well, let's just keep this rolling. And
time out.
Oh, look at that. Dude, somebody wrote us an email that just said, hey, I appreciate when humanity sneaks into your podcast.
Literally.
Again. And there it was. I had a spiritual director once that said something really profound, because Seth's not fully yet able to take care of all the business. And she said, you know, the one way to think about that is you're never more like Jesus than when you're helping him with that. And you know, just taking the servant attitude. I mean, that's a big, yeah, buddy. I don't know where your towel is, son, but we're trying to get through a podcast right now. Yeah, I'm focused. I'm not the problem here, bro. Keep all of this in. This is incredible. I know. I love you. All right, can I talk? Can I keep talking?
First I go.
Okay. All right. What do you got to say here, bro?
Fox, I was a paper, said, whoever you wish to Shema.
You want to do Shema now, or you want to end with Shema?
Wait, after.
Okay, after. Okay, I'll call you when it's time for Shema.
Tim said I was sorry. I back go back then.
Yeah, he had to go bathroom. He's sorry.
It happens to all of us.
We've all been there.
I did.
As the great book says, everybody poops.
That's right.
I know.
Oh man.
I was just copying.
So one of the interesting things about prayer is, I'm just picking it up right there. One of the interesting things about prayer is that why pray? So I look at Seth.
Great question.
And I look at Seth's action in the world, and Seth has a limited sphere of power, and more limited than I, not only because of his age, but just he does not have the same capacity. And so Seth expresses power through desire, and so through asking, and that is the perfect expression of power is asking for help. And so prayer to me is an expression of power with, and it's training me to express power relationally. Because I'm praying for things I cannot affect. And I don't know, it kind of reframes the way I look at prayer. And why would there be an arrangement like prayer? Why would God go, hey, as a relational being, you need to learn to ask? Well, I look at what Seth is like, and Seth expresses and puts desire, his will forth into the world through his desire, but his desire is expressed in a very power with kind of way. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I feel like you should unpack that more if you can.
Oh, it will be unpacked just the way Seth unpacked whatever he had going on. First of all,
welcome to VOXOLOgy.
Yes.
Totally. They have Holy Post has news of the butt.
There you go.
We have
news of the Seth.
Yes. It's just, this is what happens when no one else is home and I'm trying to record.
Sorry, Fox.
Okay, Sethy, I gotta go.
Sorry.
He's wound up today.
Dude, he is so fired up. He's been cooped up all week. All right. We're 41 minutes in and I haven't even started.
Don't even worry. Let's do it.
All right. So for Martin Luther King, what he advocated in advocating nonviolence was not the refusal of a power, but it was the practice of a different power. And it worked. It worked. And every time there have been nonviolent protests and movements, even in the face of violence, it's the ultimate display of exposing. This is when Paul will say about Jesus, he disarmed the powers and authorities and made a public spectacle of them, right? There's this line in sports, where if you really want it, like the biggest taunt you can give somebody is when they do their best and you just look at them and say, is that all you got? Mm-hmm. And so here's Jesus, the power. So think about it. Friday night, he conquers sin. Saturday, he conquers hell. Sunday, conquers death. And then what's he do? He goes and cooks his friends breakfast on a beach, right? The most mundane. It's like Jesus saying, "Is that all you got?" Like the crucifixion is the ultimate unmasking of the shortcomings of power over, right? Because they did. And you literally read the whole life of Jesus, and it's literally all the things that could happen to somebody, right? In that world happened to Jesus. Mm-hmm. Why? Why couldn't he just show up and sort of trip and fall and break his neck? Like, why did he have to die in the face of all of that? And one, it tells us about the heart of God towards suffering. But secondly, it's showing us, it's unmasking the powers and principalities for what they are and demonstrating there's a new power at work in the world that comes through vulnerability, gentleness, weakness, right? All the things that we call weak.
Yeah, anti-American traits.
Exactly. The Jesus story is not an American hero story.
Which makes Christian nationalism so fascinating.
Totes my goats, my friend, as my kids would say. All right, so let's dive in to a theological basis for the second power. All right, we're not going to get super far into this, but we can at least read some Bible together.
All right.
Jesus in the book of Mark announces his impending death 3 times. The disciples react poorly 3 times, and Jesus corrects them about leadership 3 times. It's fascinating. You could not have set up a contrast between power over and power with than these 3 occasions. So the one that's the most directly relevant to us, to what rule kind of means, are when the 2 asked Jesus, hey, we'd love to sit at your right and left hands because we're going to Jerusalem, right, to take back the kingdom, right? And so when that happens, can we sit in the places of honor? Which the chutzpah there, it's incredible. But when the other 10 heard about this, they became indignant. And you wonder why. Were they indignant because they didn't think to ask?
Yeah, probably.
Not sure. But Jesus called them together. And here's this very famous verse.
Who ran faster?
Exactly. Yes. Who ran faster to the tomb? Who got to the tomb first? I don't remember. Please tell us a couple times in the Easter story. But here's this thing, and it was called servant leadership. back when I was in church, like in like mega church land. Servant leadership it's still leadership, it's still power over, but it's exercised humbly.
Hmm.
And notice this isn't what Jesus is talking about here. You know, Jesus said to his disciples, that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, power over. And their high officials exercise authority over them. And then he could not be clearer. And so this is the name of this podcast. Not so with you. There it is.
Not so
Not
with you.
so with you. I don't care if you're a church environment that has many staff. Not so with you. I don't care if bad things are happening in the world and you want to make sure they don't happen. And so we're voting for Christians to use worldly power. Not so with you. Could not be clearer.
Yeah.
Instead, whoever wants to be great among you must be your servant.
Somebody should make
And
a
whoever
song
wants
out
to
of
be
that.
dude. And whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. So if you want to be at the head, the most prestigious social position, then choose the lowest position. Choose it. And whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man, taken from Daniel, the great exalted human figure in Daniel 7, he did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. Not so with you. So one of the things I loved about being a senior pastor of a megachurch is that I had 125 staff. And I had an office with a shower.
Really?
Bro. Oh, and a toilet. Yes.
That's
It was Chuck
amazing.
Swindoll's old office. It was incredible. We had a gym. So we'd play basketball 3 times a week. I'd come back, shower. And I had a security team. And I look back and those things were just normal.
Mm-hmm.
But I keep getting confronted with the not so with you. The like saved parking space, the not so with you. Like, I mean, and again, I mean, I'm not bagging on security teams or whatever. I'm just saying, for me, that was not an expression of power with. That was an expression of power over, and I liked it.
Yeah.
I liked having entitlements because of my so-called importance to the organization. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so this phrase, not so with you, not so with you, not so with you. Man, you couldn't be clearer about the community and its relation to power. If it looks like Gentile power, it doesn't belong with Christians. End of story. Power over, in no uncertain terms, shall not be part of the kingdom of God. According to Jesus, power over is not just a problem, but it's like one of the big heresies. And it actually inhibits God's work in the world. We think we're using power over to help God in the world.
Totally.
And it actually is doing the reverse.
Surprise.
It inhibits God's. Yeah, shocker. Shocker. Oh. So he identifies 2 powers. One power comes over others and one power comes under them or with them, right? Because he says, if you want to exercise power, then be the least.
Yeah.
Be under people as a slave, right? So he couldn't be clear that there are 2 different powers in the world. Luke's account of this conversation happens at a different time in Jesus's ministry, and they're slightly different words. He says a dispute arose among them as to which of them was considered to be the greatest. It's like Outreach Magazine naming the 50 greatest, fastest growing churches in America. Like, you could not blaspheme Jesus more than that.
Right.
Jesus said to them, the kings of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who exercise authority over them call themselves benefactors. Now, in the ancient world, a benefactor was somebody who gave you a gift, but they would expect a favor down the road in return. Right? So this was the patron-client relationship we've explored a bunch on the podcast. But even in benefactor situations, not so with you, right? Even being, so often the church will present itself as a benefactor. You know what I mean? Like, hey, we want to sponsor this thing, but it's always for the sake of something else, right? So we get our name out there, or, we get to pray at the mayor's breakfast or whatever it is. But here's what Jesus says, but you are not to be like that. Instead, and he says it again, the greatest among you should be like the youngest, and the one who rules is like the one who serves. For who is greater, the one who is at the table or the one who serves? Is it not the one who is at the table? But I am among you as one who serves. So to follow Jesus is to follow that model of power, right? When he comes against the devil's temptations, these are all passages we know, but I just want to highlight them as expressions of this power with, power under kind of idea. Jesus, full of the Holy Spirit, left the Jordan and was led by the Spirit into the wilderness, where for 40 days he was tempted. Now, the 40 days, so that tells you, wilderness and 40 days tell you that Jesus is recreating the story of Israel in himself. Mm-hmm. So he's going to be tempted by the same things that Israel was tempted with, and Jesus will succeed while Israel will fail. But all of these, interestingly enough, are expressions of power over that he refuses. The devil said to him, if you are the Son of God, tell this stone to become bread. Mm-hmm. So Jesus knows, or Satan knows who Jesus is. This is not like, hey, man, prove it. It's like, no. Use worldly power to get your messiahship. Mm-hmm. Don't suffer. Don't go the route of humiliation. Use worldly power to get God's kingdom. That's the common theme of all these. So he says, if you're the Son of God, tell this stone to become bread. Don't be hungry. Why would you, Jesus, be hungry? You're the Son of God. You can just transfigure these sorts of things. And Jesus says, man shall not live on bread alone, which is a manna reference, which is so cool. We don't have time to get into it. The devil led him up to a high place, showed him in an instant all the kingdoms of the world, the kingdoms that operate by power over. Mm-hmm. And he said to Jesus, I will give you all their authority and splendor. It has been given to me, and I can give it to anyone I want to. If you worship me, it will be yours. Temptation of power over, right? Jesus answered, it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only. Devil led him to Jerusalem, had him stand on the highest point of the temple and throw himself off because he's the Messiah, and the Messiah can't die, right? Mm-hmm. So test God. And Jesus, of course, says, do not put the Lord God to the test. Again, quoting from Deuteronomy. So when Jesus was tempted, what were the nature of his temptations? Self-sufficiency, right? Independence from the will of the Father, short-circuiting his humanity. But what they all have in common is an expression of power over creation, power over his Father, to test his Father, and power over the kingdoms, to really be the Messiah in a political and powerful sense without going through the humiliation. When we get to the disciples wanting to use power over, right? The great example is Peter cutting off the ear of the servant of the high priest, John 18. Then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus, John lets us know. Jesus commanded Peter, put your sword away. Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me? And this is one pushback we get here, because didn't Jesus tell them to get swords? Like, why did Peter have a sword? Because Jesus told him to get swords. Yeah. So they needed swords. So this is the passage that gets quoted here, Luke 22. Jesus asked them, when I sent you without a purse, bag, or sandals, did you lack anything? Nothing, the disciples answered. He said to them, but now if you have a purse, take it, and also a bag. And if you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and buy one. And you're like, wow, if the verse ended there, all these other people would be right. That, Jesus sounds like he's commanding the disciples to use power over. But Luke and Matthew have this little bitty fulfillment of prophecy that explains the sword purchase. It is written, and he was numbered with the transgressors. And I tell you that this must be fulfilled in me. Yes. So Jesus deliberately attaches the command to buy swords to the fulfillment. So Jesus is consciously fulfilling prophecy that says he will be numbered among transgressors. The disciples said, "See, Lord, here are 2 swords." And Jesus said, "That's enough." And he says it emphatically. Now, that could mean that's 2, that's all we need, or enough of the sword thinking.
Yeah.
We're not quite sure which way that goes. And so while he was still speaking, the crowd came up. The man who called himself Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. He approached Jesus to kiss him. Jesus said, "Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss?" When Jesus' followers saw that was going to happen, they said, "Lord, should we strike with our swords?" And one of them struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. But Jesus answered, "No more of this." And he touched the man's ear and healed him. Now that shows you the disciples misunderstood the point of the swords. Jesus tells them it's the fulfillment of prophecy, not power over.
Yeah.
When they use power over, he rebukes them and then heals the guy.
Yeah.
So even if you want to appeal to this passage to say, "Oh, here's,"
Keep reading.
nope, not even close. Yeah. As with most things, keep reading. This is the thing that this conversation he has with Pilate is the greatest conversation in the history of power over versus power with. So the Jewish leaders took Jesus from Caiaphas, the high priest, to the palace of the Roman governor. Now the high priest could sentence Jesus to death, but had no power to carry it out. It was early in the morning, and to avoid a ceremonial uncleanness, they did not enter the palace because it was filled with Gentiles, because they wanted to eat later the meal of the Passover, which is just fascinating. So bad religion loves obeying the rules of Passover while crucifying the Messiah.
Yep.
No
Genius.
problem.
Are you guys back to Tim? After are you done, Tim? Can you have ice cream cake for me?
Can we have ice cream cake later for Mom's birthday? Is that what you're asking me right now in the middle of the podcast?
No.
That's exactly what you were asking me. Yeah. I don't know if we'll have ice cream cake today, son. Well, no, we're not going to stay home. We're going to go out, and there's going to be ice cream and cake there. I don't know if it's ice cream cake, though.
Yeah.
Okay?
Sorry, Vox, always a packet. I would say 6.
I don't know if
Does
everyone
this
can
come
hear that,
through
but
at all?
I can hear it. I'm not sure if I'm assuming everyone else can hear it. Sorry,
I don't
VOXOLOGY
know.
podcast.
Yeah. Oh, so good. So Pilate came out to them and said, "What charges are you bringing against this man?" They replied, "If he were not a criminal, we would not have handed him over to you." Duh. Pilate said, "Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law." "But we have no right to execute anyone," they objected. This took place to fulfill what Jesus had said about the kind of death he was going to die. Pilate went back inside the palace, summoned Jesus, and said, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus, I mean, he's so freaking awesome. "Is that your own idea? Or did others talk to you about me?" "Oh, am I a Jew?" Pilate replies. "Your own people and chief priests handed you over to me. What is it that you have done?" And then Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world." Now, notice he doesn't say my kingdom is not in this world, but it's not of it. It doesn't have the same flavor. "If it were of this world, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest." So he's distinguishing fighting as part of the kingdoms of this world, but his kingdom isn't like that.
Yeah.
And this just happened where the ear got chopped off,
Mm-hmm.
right? So this is incredible. But my kingdom is from another place. So the power Jesus is radiating is from another place, is the idea.
Yeah.
"So you are a king then?" said Pilate. Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world was to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." Really not helpful answer for poor Pilate. This is John, though. So John, man, he has Jesus saying some wacky stuff. Before, so here, Jesus is distinguishing between, if my kingdom were of this world, the ofness of the world is power over.
Yeah.
The ofness of another place means it's power under.
Yeah.
And Jesus has this great line when I'm moving the story backwards a little bit. When Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid and went back inside of the palace. "Where do you come from?" he asked Jesus, but Jesus gave him no answer. Do you refuse to speak to me?" Pilate said. "Don't you realize I have power either to free you or crucify you. And then Jesus says, just the ultimate badass. You would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above.
Yeah.
In other words, even power over is at the sufferance, right, of God. I mean, like, it just, don't you realize I have the power to set you free or crucify you? And Jesus is like, yeah, you don't really. Even what little power you have is, and he will even say later, like, no one takes my life. I could call down 72,000 angels.
The ultimate power over.
Exactly. But that's not what my kingdom's about. The disciples have a hard time, not surprisingly,
Yeah, as we do.
understanding that this is the power of the kingdom, right? So they argue who's the greatest. They come back from when Jesus sends the 72 out, and he gives them power to cast out demons, to heal. And it's a form of power over, right? I mean, you're not inviting the demons to leave, you're commanding them, and you're doing something to sickness so that it goes away. They come back and they return with joy and said, even the demons submit to us in your name, and they're exultant in the power over.
Mm-hmm.
But notice how Jesus corrects them. He says, so he first celebrates. He says, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. Like we're pillaging his kingdom. I have given you authority to trample on snakes and scorpions and to overcome all the power of the enemy. Nothing will harm you. Right? Which is such an interesting statement because they all die these brutal deaths. However, do not rejoice that the spirits submit to you, but rejoice rather that your names are written in heaven. In other words, the rejoicing shouldn't be in the power you've displayed over things, but rather that you have now, that those displays have confirmed that you're actually part of my kingdom, that you're under the Father's authority, in other words. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the idea that the disciples are always having to be reminded that power with can only be exercised when you realize that everyone is having power under the one true God. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So you have to understand that we exist under the power of God in order to really share power with people. And so, here's another example. Luke 9. At that time, as the time approached for Jesus to be taken up to heaven, Jesus resolutely set out for Jerusalem. He sent messengers on ahead who went into a Samaritan village to get things ready for him, but the people there did not welcome him because he was heading for Jerusalem. When the disciples, James and John, saw this, they said, Lord, do you want us to call down fire from heaven to destroy this village? That's something Elijah did. So they're like assuming the prerogatives of the great prophet. But Jesus turned and rebuked them. And he went to another village. I mean, you're just constantly seeing the temptation of Jesus's disciples to exercise power over. And this also, I mean, here's kind of an interesting dynamic. A man, this is in Mark 9, a man in the crowd answered, Teacher, I brought you my son who is possessed by a spirit that has robbed him of speech. Whenever it seizes him, it throws him to the ground. He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, becomes rigid. I asked your disciples to drive out the spirit, but they could not. After Jesus, and so Jesus, of course, does. After Jesus had gone indoors, the disciples asked him privately, why couldn't we drive it out? And Jesus says, this kind can only come out by prayer. So that implies the disciples weren't praying. They were doing something else to try to drive out the demons because they'd had power previously to drive out demons. And so Jesus says, no. Prayer is a different kind of power. And that had to be employed here. Again, I don't understand all of the nuances of what this means. I'm just trying to show, and Fitch shows, that there is this constant delineation between two powers. It's not one power used for good or used for bad. It's two entirely different powers. Are you with me?
Yeah, dog.
Yeah, dog. Now, I'm going to cut us here because we're at 1 hour and 4 minutes.
Okay.
We got through page 8 of 44. So, with an assist to Seth Erie, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at Paul, because Paul, my goodness, Paul takes this power under and then he works it into how a church should work.
Okay, great. I had a bunch of questions about that, so that's good, because everything you just said does beg some questions to that. Also,
Yes.
I love Peter, as I've said, just because of how well he fails, but continues forward in,
I love him.
like, in a
I am that
spirit
man.
of fixing him, like,
Yep.
or repenting, true repenting, I guess.
Yeah.
But that scene with the sword, I'm trying. So our algorithms are similar in social media, and so I get a lot of sermons coming through, and they, by and large, make me feel icky, and for various reasons. Not some of them are saying really heinous things. Some of them are just kind of towing the line and playing the part.
What feels power? It feels power overy.
It does. So
like
that's why
the power
I have
of expertise.
I had a ton of questions for that. So if we're going there next time, I'll park those. But Peter in that scene, I try to imagine what that's like, because I think that our framework is obviously really built within the power over model in all aspects. I think it is very American. Like, we subverted power over us by exerting power over another nation to establish ourselves, and then we exerted power over the people that were here, and so on and so forth. And so it is very American. And then to have Christianity as the religion of the state, you see how that works out. But when I think about Peter in that situation, who would not have reacted exactly the same way? Like, I think that probably took a lot of courage on I bet you he was scared. Like, he pulled a sword out and used it in a, so it's like, I can only imagine, like,
the goodness of intention.
Yeah.
For that
and
guy.
Just riling himself up to be brave enough. His adrenaline's probably pumping. He's probably scared out of his mind, attack somebody because who he believes to be the Messiah is about to be killed. And so what would you do? Your only understanding is to stand up and defend, and then hope for pride in that. And then to be instantly rebuked and have that guy healed in front of you is so counterintuitive to everything we know and understand. Like, full stop. Like, it's just
full stop.
So now when I think about that, I'm trying so hard, because the reason I wrote those sermons is they, like, as I'm going through therapy, and she's just like, you have so much evangelical trauma to unpack in therapy. And so I'm just thinking through that after I leave the office, and like, what kind of things is she getting at with that, and blah, blah, blah. But so much of it is living in this rhetorical world where it's all just words, and often words that are constructed in a way to elicit something, but not based in anything that we're talking about right now. And then, like, really, so the reality of Peter's situation, I find really fascinating in that, because he just was doing exactly what he was built to do by the system.
Totally. Yep.
And then to have Jesus consistently reverse that all the way through. And then another question I had too was, like, is Pilate a power over via deference?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like,
so we'll get to that.
Okay.
So Romans 13. So where we're going is we're going to look at Paul, and that's going to take at least half an hour. He does so much with power under and power with that, like, we just have to sit in it. Then we're going to ask the question, can Christians ever use power over? And there are a whole bunch of answers. So some people are going to say yes, because there's only one kind of power at work in the world. And so we have to find people who have high character, and then we have to create highly accountable systems. And we're going to say, and so we're going to disagree with that. Other folks will say yes. And this is Luther. This is a really influential view, that worldly power governs the realm of politics and economics in the world, and godly power exists in human individuals and the saints. So godly power doesn't get anything done in the unjust systems of the world. It's got to be worldly power that does that. So it's a two kingdom theology. There's the kingdom of God, the kingdom of man. And so there's a different power for each. And so obviously we have to use power over. We're going to disagree with that one. There's another Christian view that says, we got to use power over for justice. And that's where we get into all that privilege stuff. Is power, using power over to accomplish justice, really accomplishing justice?
Yeah.
Another view is, well, yeah, you've got to use power over because humans are evil. This is a very popular view too.
Yeah.
So we've got to restrain evil. And this is where Romans 13 gets deployed in this argument. Well, yeah, dude, that God gave the power of the sword to governments to restrain evil. And there is something to that, right? It's the stoplight example. It's the fact that there are things that are banned and outlawed that discourage certain kinds of harmful behaviors. Absolutely. There's a place for that. The issue is that Christians will think that it's that place that we can get people healed, redeemed, and transformed using that power. But that power, all that does is preserve life. That's all it can do. Right? The other power is the only power that unleashes the power of the kingdom in the world.
Yeah.
So even when we use power over to protect vulnerable kids in school districts, to go after predatory businesses that prey on, or pastors that prey on older folks, and we get lawyers and power over things involved, there's a place for that. But that's not Christian power. That's not the power of God we're unleashing in the world. And so we have to be really clear about when it's appropriate to use it, what it's for, and what its limited aims are. Because the minute we employ power over, we've ceased operating in the realm of what God can do to surprise us.
And I wonder how, like, what's the word? Like, changing shape.
There's lots of
is.
gesturing. There's lots of gesturing
like,
going on if you were just listening.
Like the way you're just talking about that is like, I imagine people are like, okay, so give me a set of do's and don'ts and the rules of how to operate within that system correctly. But I imagine that system, again, requires a lot of discernment, because one time something looks purple, the next time it looks red. And it's like,
totally,
you know what I mean? Like, so.
And not only that, the habits, the communal habits that are needed to sustain a resistance to power over and an embracing of the power of the towel and basin, the power of the bread and the cup, are totally foreign to the American church, because even platforming is powering over, right? Platforming certain gifts, platforming certain experts, platforming certain people, all of that is an expression of power over. And so we're going to get into habits of rule that require mutuality.
Yeah, that's great.
Reciprocity, which is different than mutuality. Plurality, where power rests in community. And to the people who've been hurt by the church, we're going to say, don't trust individuals, trust communities. Trust. And what do you look for in communities? Well, you look for humility. You look for the embracing of weakness and limitation. You look for shared practices. You look for the abhorrence of hierarchy. You know what I mean? You look for shared power. I mean, all the things. But the church, and I've done this. We're so enamored with power over because we think it's safe in our hands.
Well, that's all we know. All of our systems are built exactly that way. So it's like, why would the church not build itself in the exact same model?
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense, except Jesus and Paul are really clear about this. So yeah, we can argue. And then you get into power over expressions of charity. This is where we'll end, right? So this is like 2 or 3 episodes from now. Power over expressions of evangelism. Power over expressions of statements of belonging to sexual minorities. Right? I mean, so even our like statements on marriage and family could be expressions of power over.
Yeah.
Now, I can hear pushback already, and when we get there, we will deal with it. But I'm just saying, having a statement isn't bad. The way it's used can be an expression of power over, of course. Yeah. Good Lord. Do our statements invite power with, like conversation, hospitality, listening? Or do our statements invite shaming, excluding, right? Othering? So if not so with you is the predominant principle for the community of faith, as not only it exists with each other, but as it practices in the world. Like when you love your enemy, that's exercising a different kind of power.
Absolutely.
When you forgive a debt, that's exercising a different kind of power. And I'm bad at this. All of this is, I'm bad. All of it.
I think
All
we
of it's
all
bad.
are. This is like, I feel like, so as we're coming out of a season of, for lack of a better term, deconstruction, and we have so many people in our listener base that have found themselves, having torn down everything and then looking like, what is this? What do I do with this? This is what I think reconstruction looks like to me, again, for lack of a better term, but
Yeah.
realizing what system I was a part of and taking that step, taking that beat to say, okay, how is Jesus, everything you just went through for the last hour, how does this restructure so that I can look how to exist in this world?
And I want to get really practical with that.
Yeah,
like we're still in theory mode.
Yeah.
We're still in like Bible mode, but I feel like we have to show it from the scriptures.
Yeah.
Because one of the counters in the future will be, well, but look at God having power over in the Old Testament, right? I mean, dude, he was using coercive power. Like here's the poor dude like touching the ark, zap. He's good. He gone.
He gone.
You know what I mean? God, ordering the slaughter of people. I mean, bro, come on, that's some power over. So, I mean, and we invariably come back to those sorts of questions, but I just want to build a base from the New Testament that says, and it's in the Old Testament too. But as hard as it was for the disciples to embrace power with, it was harder for Israel. Because remember, God's promise to Israel was, if you obey me, I will be your national defense. So that's why God was against military treaties and taking a census for military purposes. God was against the violence in the Old Testament. That was never his plan. So we'll get there. But yeah, bro, I hope it's as challenging to others as it is to me, because it brings into sharp relief the Christian activism to use the Supreme Court, the Congress, and the presidency to bring about Christian aims or a Christian nation or whatever. That's a trusting of power over that is not only like non-biblical, but it's anti-Jesus in terms of like how Jesus lived and acted in the world. And so, people get sick of hearing that about Christian nationalism. We're like, well, come on, man, you're just parroting political points. You're like, there was such a thing as Israelite nationalism that was rebuked by Yahweh all throughout the Old Testament. And if you think Yahweh's happy with, the murder of innocent Gazans, hell's no. It's like, the harshest statements get applied to the people who claim God the most. And so anyway, all that is to say, there's a lot more to talk about. Yeah. So here's what Seth and I are going to do. We're going to debrief that fiasco. And we're going to talk about boundaries.
Hey, when you gotta go.
No, not that part. Okay. That part, that's all legit. Oh, no. When you gotta go, you gotta go.
Too legit to
Oh, that's funny. That's funny. So Seth and I are going to debrief that. Like the ice cream cake question could have waited. That could have been held another half an hour. One of the things I love about our community is how much they love Seth, even though they can't always understand him or hear him. Like our community just loves that little dude. And because he is this to me. There's very little he has power over, but he has power in the world, and he unleashes it like in ridiculous fashion. Like he'll just see somebody who their face is upset, and he will just go over them and hug them, like full on hug for a couple of minutes. And you just see them melt. These are not people we know. And he just does something that disarms.
Well, it's without any like expectation of reciprocity or anything, like just like
nope.
Someone who needs to be loved is being loved.
Yeah. You're hurting. I give hugs.
Yeah. The end.
That's all you need to know.
Yeah.
Anyway, hey, we love you guys. We really do. And we are delighted to be a small part of the journey. And so that's all we got. Oh, Seth. Shema, bro. Oh, you're sick now? Okay. He's sick now.
What a roller coaster it's been.
Just keep it all. He's just magnificent. It's just so.
Yeah, I'm sick now.
Oh, he's gonna yell at me if I don't do it. So may the Lord bless you and keep. Oh, that's the wrong one. Shema Israel, Adonai Elanechu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord alone. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And as Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself.
Boom.
Amen.
Amen.
He's totally chirping at me. Bye.